Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on defending against breaches, perspectives on MDR versus XDR. As many of you know, there's a lot of acronyms that go on in this business, and so there's a lot of conversation around these two new acronyms, relatively new on both of them. So I wanted to get together today with panelist Craig Robinson from IDC. Craig will be presenting on the IDC perspective on these two. And then I will talk a little bit beforehand and afterwards about GoSecure's take on all of these. Real quickly, let me jump off a video here so I don't distract from the presentation itself. We're going to have an interactive presentation here as Craig is presenting. I will ask questions, and we also have a couple other things that will happen here as it relates to polls and what have you. But as always with the GoSecure webinars, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So please, in the GoToWebinar control panel, enter your questions, and we will get through as many of them as we can. There are also a number of handouts that are available to you, GoSecure documents that talk a little bit more about our offerings as well. So we have probably about half an hour to 40 minutes of content here, depending on how much Craig and I talk back and forth. He and I have met many times before, and we have a good talking relationship. So we'll see where that goes. But without much more, I did cover a little bit about the agenda here. So we're going to talk about a little bit, Craig's going to get into the evolution of managed security services. I myself, I run product management and marketing here, and I've been in the security and technology industry for almost 30 years. The back half of this, or more than half of it now that I think about it, has actually been in security itself from a vendor perspective. And I've watched this evolution, what you'll hear from Craig. I've lived all of it, initially as an implementer and then later on as part of the vendor part of the equation. So there's been a lot going on in the security space and the managed security space. And now we move on to today's topic, which is managed detection and response and XDR. And what is the difference between the two? And why would an organization consider one or the other and then ultimately choose one or the other? Craig will also talk a little bit about purchasing trends, some new research coming from IDC that I think is very interesting for all of us to consider where's the market going. And then I'll get into a little bit about the GoSecure offering. And then as noted, we will have questions at the end. So again, please, if you have any questions at all, enter them into the GoToWebinar control panel. Down towards the bottom is the question section there. But first, we want to start with a poll. Again, I've been in this industry for a long time, as has Craig, and we've seen a lot of things come and some go, if you will. But MDR is still somewhat new in the grand scheme of things for an industry that is nigh on 30 plus years old. So we're going to start with a quick poll for our attendees on what or how familiar are you with managed detection response, not GoSecure. I'm going to talk to you about that, but with managed detection response services in general. How familiar are you? So I'll give everybody about 30 seconds to respond. It'd be very helpful if you can respond. So please select one of the following as it states here, and I will be on mute for just a moment and then come back soon to close us off on the first poll. All right, there we go, about our 30 or so seconds to give people a chance to respond. Looks like we've got quite a number of responses there, which is good. So next up is, I believe we'll take a look at the poll responses here. And there we go. And this should be interesting for you, Craig, as we get into this, particularly as you're going to talk about the two. But I think it confirms, to be honest, a lot of what we're hearing at the GoSecure side. We have conversations. A lot of hearing of the term. You can't go to a conference, for example, as we get back into live conferences and not see MDR. It was all over the place at Black Hat, for example, last year in August, as was XDR. But a lot of you, most of you, in fact, are not very familiar with what these are and what the difference is between the two and why you would choose one or the other. So this webinar is right up your alley. As far as those looking at both MDR and XDR, number 2 on our list is also right up what Craig's going to talk about for you here today. So wonderful stuff here. Interesting that a couple of you are saying you don't get any value from your current MDR services. If nothing else, I'd always be interested to see where that is and why that is. But that might be a better question for a different webinar. But without any further ado, let me pass ourselves on over to Mr. Robinson. Craig, the floor is yours, and I'll let you go, and I'll interject myself as necessary with your presentation.
Okay, I always get scared when people start talking about Mr. Robinson. So,
no worries. I know you was Craig, so I apologize for that.
That's okay. This is going to be great. So, John, it's awesome to be able to have a chance to talk to your audience today about MDR and XDR and some of the differences and some of the similarities. You know, a lot of it is going to come down to what's their desired business outcome in terms of what sort of a decision if they're kind of toying on the middle between the two. So this will be a good discussion. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide so we can get into some of the content. You know, what we really think about MDR is a result of the current evolution of managed security services. You know, the classic definition of managed security services revolved around, you know, we're the managed security services provider. We'll take care of your mess for less was a common old term that used to be thrown around. But it really started around, you know, the initial things that security had to handle was a little bit simpler back in the day. And I'm not even sure if we want to say back in the day was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But it used to really revolve around, you know, that layer one, that antivirus, firewall, your intrusion detection system. Those are the sorts of things that you often had a managed security service offering that says, you know, something, we can take care of that for you. And some of that's still pretty hard. You know, one of the hardest things you can ever set up, you know, for example, is a VPN connection from site to site or setting up new branches. Well, those things are really complicated. So it wasn't a surprise that there were a lot of companies out there that said, you know something, we're going to take care of this for our customers. The next layer of managed security services really revolved up into that detection, you know, and, you know, John, I'm kind of old school. I don't know if you are, but I still get, you know, a newspaper delivered to me every day. You know, I just can't get away from that. I was a paper boy for a couple of years, way back in the day. And if you look at any of these headlines that come out, you know, newspapers are often cybersecurity newspapers because they start talking about the latest attacks, right? Whether it's Colonial Penn this year or the Kaseya attack, or even just some of the news items that come out of, you know, governmental bodies. So, for example, you start looking at what President Biden has done with his executive order on cybersecurity, and all these new regulations that are coming out talking about different notification requirements if you get an attack or if you get hacked. So, leading up to this, we've really focused a lot more around detection and what did that detection look like before? John, you might remember that back in the day, it used to be, well, your managed service provider will go out there, and if they detect something in your environment or maybe an attack coming in, they'd notify you. They'd kind of, you know, toss it over the wall to you and say, okay, you need to go add this IP list to your blacklist, or you need to go patch this system. And a lot of times it was left up to the, you know, consuming organization to be able to take the actions that are required to either protect or to respond to these threats. That's great if you have a 24/7 IT staff or a security staff, but, you know, what do we do about those companies that, you know, potentially don't have that? Or maybe they're just afraid whether or not they're up to that challenge. You know, this stuff isn't simple. You know, it's complicated when you start making modifications. So I think part of the rise of the managed detection and response offering has been this recognition that, you know something, what we were doing in the past isn't working anymore. We need 24/7, 365. We can't just depend upon security being a 9-to-5 sort of offering. We need people to kind of handle that classic blocking and tackling that revolves around the detection and response component of managed detection and response. We can't just rely upon picking things up the next day. So that was a big rise of MDR. The other rise for MDR really revolved around still that classic, we still have this mess in our SOC, our Security Operations Center, or we have we have a whole bunch of tools in our SOCs. A lot of them aren't connected. we don't even know if they're connected properly, and you know, what do we do to make sure what we have is working? Well, what MDR really does is it allows that to kind of be, you know, put off in the sense of, let's take that telemetry, you know, whether that's an IaaS system that's in AWS, whether that's something in our edge environment, whether that's something in our classic work from home situation today, or in our on-premise office as we start doing that hybrid, get back to the office sort of environment. What MDR really does is it correlates all that information, ingests all that information into the backend systems of the MDR provider, and then they're able to do that classic detection and response. They're the ones that start working at detecting everything that's going on in your environment, and they do the response. It doesn't mean that that end client doesn't end up getting engaged, but it's more of getting engaged only when those certain thresholds are hit to where you kind of mutually agree with your MDR provider that, you know, this is something where we want to get engaged in to see what the containment action might be, or what sort of response action might be, because, you know, every client's environment is a little bit different. Does that make sense, John? Do I need to elaborate more on this?
No, I think this is good. And yeah, I will say I did break the physical paper habit a few years ago. Yeah, I went completely digital on my news, and I appreciate not having the black ink on my fingers any longer. But I did want to, you know, you brought up a question, or you brought up a comment about in the media, you know, how much in the media. And I'm just curious what, you know, what your take is on that. I mean, yes, it's the big breaches, you know, from the WannaCry and all the others in the past 2 years, they always make the headlines. That makes perfect sense. But there's a lot of regulations now around if an organization is of a certain size in this breach, they have to publicize it. There's so much coming out in the media today about cybersecurity, and the vast majority of it is negative because it grabs headlines. But if I'm an IT or security person, you know, I've got to answer to my board, I've got to answer to my senior leadership, and there's just a lot of answers, a lot of questions that come out of this. So first question for me is, if I'm a security professional, I mean, how do I deal with this massive influx? And then, you know, are MDR, XDR legitimate things to look at to be able to answer the question, are we secure, which ultimately is what always boils down to.
Yeah, that's true. Here's the interesting part, and it's kind of interesting that you bring up the board, because, you know, cybersecurity is no longer the exclusive domain of really smart people sitting in a security operations center. Or maybe that just might be a couple of IT people, you know, that kind of share that IT and security mix. The interest that has percolated towards the top of the C-suite and the board is largely because of those incidents where you know, board members or, you know, CFOs and other people are kind of looking at what's going on and going, could this happen to me? You know, how applicable are all these attacks and all these different regulations apply to me, and who really has that expertise? Do I need to dedicate someone just to monitor all the different regulations that might affect me in terms of, you know, privacy and risk that I need to keep track of? And, you know, in case there's a break the glass moment and there's an incident response engagement where I need to bring in professionals to work with me to respond to these attacks, what are the notification requirements? You know, that seems to change on an almost daily basis in terms of some of the requirements. I mean, just today I was reading how that Defense Authorization Act, you know, in the United States was put off, and that was supposed to have some new requirements around notification, and it looks like that may not occur. So, I mean, that's just hot off the presses. And yes, I didn't actually read that in my newspaper because I haven't grabbed it yet. That was digital. But, you know, maybe the bigger question is, how does MDR and how does XDR help that? Well, I think we probably need to talk a little bit about XDR here because, you know, as we said, there's a little bit of confusion out there, right? If there's one thing that firms like IDC and others like us, we like to define new terms. So, you know, you could almost go through the entire alphabet and you can add a letter in front of DR, and that's going to be either some sort of new tool, platform, or service. You know, you hear about MDR, which is managed detection response. You hear about NDR, which is network detection response. You have EDR, endpoint detection response. You've got PDR. I just saw this one recently, which is phishing detection and response. So you just kind of throw your hands up and go, what do all these mean, and which ones are applicable to me? Well, XDR was kind of like, I think, that classic name to use because X can represent almost anything, right? What XDR really is it's kind of two things. Number one, it's a recognition that, especially with all the digital transformation that's occurred, that attention that we used to really pinpoint in on the endpoint, well, the endpoint's still super important. It's not enough. We have to be paying attention to more telemetry than what your classic EDR looks like. You need to look in the cloud. You need to look at your edge environment. You need to look at your IoT and OT environment. You need to look at the telemetry that comes across your various network devices. And it's like, okay, great, we're getting all this telemetry in, John, and we're ingesting it. How do we make sense out of all of that? Well, that's kind of the promise of XDR, right? Is what XDR does, and MDR does as well, but we're focused on XDR here for a second, is it correlates all that information, sucks it into these data lakes and other data repositories, tries to connect the dots together to say, okay, here's an indicator of attack that we might need to look at. Really, if you think about XDR, it's almost, I like to think of it almost as a SIM on steroids. You know, it takes SIMs to that next level by ingesting all these different pieces of telemetry and then adding correlation and response to it. What an organization really needs to look at is, well, what's the difference between XDR then and MDR? John, I'm glad you asked that question. Because really the difference is who owns it, right? Who's doing that detection and response? You know, we've been stuck listening to people on webinars like this talking about one common theme throughout the years, and that is the lack of trained cybersecurity professionals, right? I think there's something like either 1.5 million or 2.5 million or 2.5 million open positions in cybersecurity. I mean, that just means that organizations, and I assume it's probably a big chunk of the audience that's listening to this today, recognizes that it's hard to find trained cybersecurity professionals that you can trust to do things like manage your environment, connect all the pieces together, you know, detect any attacks that are coming, even better, preemptively see what's coming across the horizon and make decisions in advance of an attack, or start thinking about what if an attack comes in, how do we respond? What do our playbooks look like? Really, that's kind of the key difference between MDR and XDR. MDR wraps these services such as threat hunting, you know, that we talk about, not only the reactive threat hunting in terms of responding to attacks that are already ongoing, but also they do that proactive threat hunting, you know, where they go off and they say, okay, based on the threat intelligence, based on the things that we see in the dark web, what are some areas that we might need to take a deeper dive in, which has had minimal indicators of attack previously, to see if there's something that's lurking in our environment. You know, John, you probably recognize some of the statistics, you know, the classic ones that everyone talks about in cybersecurity, the mean time to detection or the mean time response. You know, what are those being measured in? You know, unfortunately, what are they being measured in? Days, weeks, months? It's scary sometimes. And a lot of those are because, you know, the sort of nasty attacks that we see, those ransomware attacks that make the news, you know, a lot of times those attacks occur after someone's been in your environment for a while, right? They've been in there, they've done some lateral movements, they're on multiple endpoints or different areas of your environment. They do the data exfiltration where they take that data to where they can, you know, take it and hold it, and then they encrypt it. And then they say, okay, you got to pay this ransom. So really the question for MDR versus XDR is do you have the people that are trained that can respond to these sort of ransomware attacks? Or are you staffed? You know, is that something that you really need to truly keep in-house? If so, then XDR makes a lot of sense. There's, you know, XDR is a great platform, but it's still a platform that someone has to manage, someone has to monitor on that, someone has to pay a lot of attention. So when someone sits down and says, gosh, do I do XDR or MDR? They're both great things to utilize. You just have to figure out, where do you want your people to focus in on? Do you want to focus in on responding to these attacks and detecting them? You want to handle that in-house, then XDR is great, because it really is a great accumulation of those technologies that you need. If you want to just push it off to people who kind of live, breathe, and die by this sort of stuff, then you probably want to go with an MDR provider and let them, do those threat hunting actions, work with someone that has an incident response capability. So if and when that break the glass moment, comes, and, I hope your audience, I'm gonna tease them here. If they start looking at the bat, the hieroglyphic of Batman out there, they need help. They need superhero. That's where you start getting those incident response people. So
you mentioned that. The one point I wanted to maybe not dig into, but highlight as well, as you mentioned the workforce shortage or gap or whatever term. And you're right, we've been talking about it in the industry for years. I mean, even in my managed security services provider days, we talk about there, because it's still a challenge. But the additional challenge on top of that is just keeping people. We face that, as does everybody else. You might find the people, but can you keep them when you see the salary increases and what have you? And the work from home has reinforced to a lot of organizations that people can work anywhere. So now you've got your high-end people who are getting poached and offered these great benefits. It's not just I don't have enough people, it's can I keep them? And if I have to keep replacing people, can I do that in a way that allows me to do what you are saying XDR does, which is take all this data and take all these alerts and correlate this and figure out where I need to spend my time.
Yeah.
That's what we see, especially here at GoSecure, when people talk MDR, they've just thrown up their hands and said, I've given up. I just literally cannot even attempt to keep these people anymore, let alone 24/7, let alone vacations and all the normal things that come with any employees. So that's where they're coming to us. And the other part that I wanted to chime in on, you mentioned SIM, and SIM has been around forever. It's a very mature technology, but it has its own baggage. I mean, I've talked to how many customers, I'm sure you have too, that, oh, I've got a SIM, and you can just hear the eye rolls and you can hear the groan. It's, it is a piece of the solution, but we see that all the time as well, is that somebody comes to us and says, well, I've got a SIM, but oh no, my SIM guy left, or, is it doing, and really where the conversation goes anymore, and it's one of the terms you used on your previous slide, your IDC intro slide, is outcomes. And for me, this ties back into, as you noted, this is now a board issue. This is a senior management, the senior leadership issue. Is, are we secure? And when we have the break the glass moment, are we prepared to minimize it so we're not one of those months of dwell time, but can we respond quickly? And all of that is it's raising questions that a lot of cybersecurity teams are unclear and or unprepared to answer, even if they do have SIM, or they do have an MSSP helping them with their firewalls, or they do have, they think they have the right people to do XDR. It's not a binary decision anymore. Not that it has been for years, but I see a lot of organizations think that MDR and XDR is binary. I just need to pick one, and if I have my own team, I'm going to go XDR. It's like, no. Just step back, and you need to ask these other questions. And so that's my feedback on what you just said. I'm not sure if that either leads you into the next slide or provides you additional context.
Yeah, let me just add one more thing. And since cybersecurity is a board issue, one of the things that boards are always interested in is, how effective is my organization? Where are my efficiencies? And one of the frustrations that SOC analysts have, especially ones that are using the classic SIMs or XDR or other mixtures of tools and platforms to protect their environment, is they have to deal with the burnout of their analysts, because they're dealing with so many false positives. So much of their time is spent chasing ghosts. They think that they have something that they need to go attack, and it turns out to be nothing. And they just see the inefficiencies in terms of what they're spending the actual time on. So when they go home every day, and after a very frustrating day, what do? They start going to LinkedIn and other job sourcing places to say, I kind of go somewhere else because, you know, I don't really feel like I'm being productive. You know, I'm not valued in my job because all I'm doing is chasing stuff that doesn't need to be chased. You know, imagine what could happen if I was actually utilized in a way where my talents could be fully utilized. So, you know, that's becoming a discussion. So boards want to know why you're losing your people. You're losing your people because you're using tools and platforms that are ineffective, that aren't a good use of time. So we need to start, you know, pushing stuff off like that so we can make John's people frustrated. You
Yes,
know,
make my people frustrated. No, exactly right. Well, let's see where we are at here. I mean, we've talked a lot of different stuff, and I've lost track of our slides here, Craig. So I'll move us up, and you tell me where we are at in relation to this slide.
yeah, you know, this is really interesting too, because this kind of talks about the tools, technologies that are in an MDR solution, right? And these are some of the kind of key things that you want to be looking at. To be honest, not all of these are used. For example, we just did a major study, and we were talking with different different firms that were utilizing MDR, and we kind of went into this thinking that SIMs would be used a lot more, and they're not. A lot of times when organizations start utilizing an MDR provider, they essentially churn off or essentially don't need their SIM that they used previously, because that sort of data collection and analysis is now handled by their MDR provider. So when we start talking about the next symbol over the aggregation of data, that starts being handled by the MDR provider. They're doing the things that start, you know, analyzing the data to pick up indicators of attack. All these things are basically tools, technologies, and capabilities that you want to kind of look for in an MDR provider. Frankly, you want to use them if you're looking at XDR, but again, keep in mind what MDR surrounds all these technologies with is essentially it's almost like an orchestra with a good director in front of it. You know, everything kind of hums together because that back-end MDR provider is able to take a look at the threat intelligence, for example. They're able to go out there and look at not just the intelligence that's coming in for a particular organization. They can look at multiple companies within that industry and start seeing what's coming against them. They can start going off and do those proactive threat hunts and take a look at not just their one particular customer's environment, but look at all of them at once. You kind of get that scaling. You know, it's all about scale. In real estate, we talk about it's all about location, location, location. When you start talking about, you know, the capability of utilizing machine learning, you know, to look at a ton of events that come in, it's all about scale. They need size in order to be really effective. And that's the kind of cool part about utilizing an MDR provider, is they're able to scale all these things out. And what does the end result mean? It means that, you know, looking at that right-hand side, we're looking at a desired business outcome. The desired business outcome is we've got people whose core competency is what? Monitoring your environment, detecting attacks, and responding in a timely manner. What does that mean for your security staff? Well, when's the last time you guys spent some time on the first day of a DevOps sprint to see where security was being layered into your software development efforts? You know, when's the last time you were able to sit down and do a tabletop exercise that looks at the sort of scenarios that may be coming out without being worried about having to answer your cell phone or respond to a text because you've got an attack and you got to get back to the SOC to go reply to it? You know, it allows your people to focus in on the key things that are geared towards their organization without having that noise that comes from having to investigate all these different attacks. That's really the key, you know, kumbaya moment, you know, out of MDR is the blocking and tackling that I really think of as investigating these alerts and responding to them. It's done by someone that knows that business really well. You're able to turn your attention to the sort of, you know, other events that you have to handle as for normal security operations, and frankly, the business operations. We get the security people out of the SOC and we start getting them to talk to the business, and you know what that creates? That creates efficiencies. That creates a better outcome.
One of the things that, as I've been in the the MSSP and the MDR business and space, when I look at MDR as an offering, if you will, it started a lot with EDR vendors adding the management component, which is completely logical. But over time, the market has said that was a great start, thank you very much, but I need more than that now. And so you see that. So I mean, I guess, and a lot of things you're showing here are, I think, things that you've seen in the past couple of years. So, when it comes to looking at an MDR provider, you have a lot of pieces here. Some are pretty seemingly would be standard, others may not be.
Yeah.
Or even, I mean, I guess you could say XDR to a certain extent is a fair amount of this without the threat hunting team. So what should an organization be looking at when it comes to MDR? I mean, what kind of questions should they be asking?
Yeah, you want to probably first of all find out what sort of experience they have in your industry. You should be able to easily, be able to get a client referral from someone within your industry because, as you know, John, every industry is a little bit different. So you want to focus in on someone who knows not only your industry but also your particulars in your nation. And gosh, nowadays you need to even be aware of what's going on in your state, right? And if you're in the United States, there's so many different cybersecurity regulations. Start looking at in terms of what are their metrics. How quickly are they able to detect? How quickly can they respond? How many different SOCs do they have? That's a key differentiator because you want diversity, right? Just like your stock portfolio. John, you and I really have to worry about our 401ks because we're getting old and we have to start thinking about retirement. You also want diversity in terms of the people that are responding to attacks. So, what sort of SOC operation centers does that MDR provider have? Take a look at their threat hunting. Do they just do the reactive threat hunts in terms of taking a look at something that's already hit your environment and then looking throughout your environment for to see if that attack has spread, or do they also offer proactive threat hunting? What do they do about that? And take a look at onboarding. I think that's kind of a key. How quickly can you get onboarded? And how quickly is your MDR provider able to ingest your prior history of security logs and events that really help to feed those machine learning algorithms that sift and look for those needle in the haystacks to find attacks that may have been overlooked previously. So those are just some of the key differentiators. There's probably more, but I think those are the ones that come top of mind to me.
So a similar question then, if an organization is seriously considering XDR, where they believe they have the team to do it, they want a platform to do this, I mean, what would they be looking for there?
Yeah, well, here's the key thing on XDR is what you often see in an MDR provider is an incident response retainer, and it's usually with the same provider, not always, but usually, because we all like to think that we're immune and that we're going to be able to pick up every attack that comes. But gosh, we've got statistical data showing that most people recognize that the days of saying, "Oh, I'll never have to have an incident response retainer or incident response situation because I got great security," it can happen to anyone, right? So we need to be prepared for that. So if you're going down the XDR route, two key things: are you staffed for this? And are you resilient? Not just in terms of resilience, in terms of being able to sustain and respond to an attack, but are your people resilient? If your tier 2 SOC analyst on the night shift were to quit, do you have someone that you can slot into that to pick up that shift if something happens? Again, keeping in mind that staffing is just such a big concern. So that's why XDR is a little bit more difficult for the small mid-size players because you really need it's much harder to do that staffing with that layer than it is for a larger player. And then just making sure that you've got incident response playbooks and capabilities prepared in case you get attacked, because when you're going down that XDR route, you often don't have that third-party firm that kind of understands your network topology understands that there's a difference between containing a machine in your manufacturing environment versus, say, a salesperson that's remote. They understand that difference. So you really need to have that communication. An MDR provider should almost be considered an extension of your security operations team. Well, when you look at security operations teams, unfortunately, they too often get siloed. John, you and I probably remember, how hard it took for CIOs to get engaged with the business, right? And I think CISOs and security leaders are still kind of fighting that battle as well. It's getting better, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, we still see a lot of that. Yeah, that they're siloed or they report into something else. Yeah. But anyway, to your point, agreed. Yes.
So I hope that answers your question.
It does. It does. All right, let's keep moving on then with the planned agenda and see where we go from that. So here's your next slide.
Yeah, nothing beats a good word cloud, right? So this is something I just kind of want to throw out there because it's amazing when you just start thinking about the different buzzwords, but also the sort of different capabilities that you need to start thinking about in a detection and response. And I'm using that generically when this is MDR or XDR, but look at the big one, detection. It just stares at you in the face, right? You need to be able to detect things. And you need to be just as good at detecting alerts at 2 o'clock in the morning as you are at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So as organizations that might be listening in today, as they start thinking about which route do I go down on, make sure when they're kind of making that decision between MDR and XDR that they've got that 2 o'clock in the morning situation kind of figured out. But do they have these other capabilities? Ask your XDR provider or ask your MDR provider, do we have the playbooks that we need in order to respond to an attack? What sort of user behavioral analytics are we using? What are we doing to tune our environments? What sort of threat hunting are we able to do either with the provider or internally? What's our response look like? What's our metrics? Where are we at now? Where do we need to be? And how do we compare to our peers in our environment? That's kind of important. So all these things are kind of important. It's kind of funny when you scramble the word clouds. The big things that we kind of think about in this detection response capability really just scream at us. It's the analytics. It's the threat hunting. It's the detection. You can stick the word advanced in front of almost any word in here, and it would probably apply. Start thinking about your incident response capabilities. Start thinking about, are you able to do the forensics that are required to answer your stakeholders? And those stakeholders might be partners, they might be shareholders, they might be regulatory bodies. So are you prepared in those instances to be able to give the forensic reports if and when these attacks come across? So those are just some of the things that we think about when in this word cloud that just kind of just stare out at us, that I think people want us to start thinking about some of these functions and terms that we have out here.
Yeah, always agree with a good word cloud. I know I've used many versions over the years, and it's interesting to see, a good number of these have been here for quite a while. But things like detection and threat have always been high on the list, and I don't see any of that changing in the foreseeable future. So this is the world that we all exist in.
Yep.
You got some quick research, and I think you mentioned at one point this may even be new research, but I'll let you dig into this real quickly.
Yeah, relatively new. So working for IDC, we're like the mother. This is the survey I call the mother of all surveys, because this was 1,500 respondents, that we asked about, what are they doing in terms of buying? What's their plan? What's their historical buying? What are their plans to purchase different things? So as you can see, this is a global study ranging from anywhere from India to Singapore to Germany to the US. And the key thing that we're asking here is, what are their plans to purchase and manage security services? Well, you might recall from that very first slide that we showed, we consider MDR to be kind of like that third tier evolution of MSS. if you're not dealing with that third tier sort of operations that MDR kind of embodies, then you've got a lot of maturity to do. So when we went out there and we said, okay, are you looking to purchase MSS and we include MDR within that? Look, there's not a huge spread. Singapore at 56%, Australia at 50%, and everyone else in between there. So what does that mean? I think it's a recognition within the market that they need to mature their capabilities. They need to raise their levels, and MDR is a great way to just kind of shift that MDR back off to someone else and let them handle the detection and response. And it's a global demand. So it's kind of cool to see that sort of maturity, or at least recognition within the market that this is something that they're getting serious about consuming to improve their cybersecurity capabilities.
And this maps fairly well to the poll we took earlier. Not quite the 50%, but I would say between those who are aware and considering it right there. So, yeah, a lot of awareness, I think, and hopefully we've been able to have a lot of the questions that customers had or organizations had. I do want to take this moment. One, thank you very much, Craig. Two, don't go anywhere, because obviously we have the Q&A at the end. Yeah. Three, a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions, particularly for Craig, you heard us, and I think we went quite a bit off script as it relates to the slides themselves, but we covered an awful lot of different areas and all around MDR and XDR. So please, if you have any questions for Craig, enter them into the GoToWebinar control panel. There is a questions section at the bottom. I know our marketing team just reminded people as well, but please, this is a great time. As you can tell, Craig knows his business as much as he kids about his and my age. It's true, we are both of that age. We've seen an awful lot. And Craig always brings an amazing perspective owing to his role at IDC. So great stuff, Craig. Again, don't go anywhere. I got a couple of quick slides, and then hopefully we'll have a couple of questions from the audience. Super. So real quickly, let me talk about GoSecure's MDR. And a lot of it is what Craig was talking about. Go figure, but we are very proud of our solution here. And our solution has been broader, I would say, than a lot of the market for quite a while. Did we start with an EDR agent? We absolutely did. But from the very early days, we wrapped a service around it. In fact, for a while there, we actually had a service before we had EDR built into it from our MDR, but we've extended it to include some of the other acronyms that Craig mentioned earlier. NDR is in there, for example. We do have network detection. We do have EDR. We do have next generation antivirus. We have what we call IDR, which goes along with Craig's new acronym of phishing detection and response, but it is inbox detection and response. And then we do also have insider threat capabilities, not your traditional DLP based. This is taking a different tactic. It was actually built to take into account the Snowden impact and how that was done within the federal government. It applies to any organization. So our approach has always been around behaviors within these particular categories. And then, again, to follow up on what Craig was mentioning, it's not about waiting for something to occur and then go seeing if it happened elsewhere. It is identifying suspicious events or even, interesting events, and then figuring out through a lot of automation as well as human review, is this going somewhere or does it have the potential? It's one of those, I have A, B, and C. If I add D, I'm in trouble, but A, B, and C by themselves are not a problem. But as soon as D happens, I know I've got issues here. It's that level of analysis, but also our ability to do that across this broad visibility that we have here. And our approach has always been, let's have the processes, let's have the automation, let's have the people, and then we can increase the visibility. But if you start with process and automation and people to begin with, it's easier than trying to reverse that. And we see a lot of the MDR market did that. They reversed it. They started with technology and added service later. So this has always been our approach, and will be going forward as we grow our offering. It will be around increasing our event visibility. It is going to be about increasing our automation. We're happy with what we have today, but we know, as Craig noted, there's a lot more we can do, anybody can do, and so we want to build that. And then we also tie this in with additional features, which are probably in the traditional MSS category that Craig was talking about. Can we manage firewalls? Yes. Can we do patch management? Yes. Can we do vulnerability management? Yes. But what we do is all of that rolls under the same team. It's all part of the MDR team. So we can connect a lot of these, previously disconnected dots, if you will, and able to make you even more secure. An example would be MDR identifies that a breach, attack, what have you, was happening, and the net cause of it was a communication with a command and control server. Great. What we should do to remediate that is to change the firewall rule so it can't happen again. Generally, for a lot of organizations, those are two separate teams. If you're talking about a traditional MSSP, it's going to be two separate teams. Within the Go Secure world, it can be a single entity, or is a single entity, and can't be a single operation. The MDR team will stop it from being a problem. They'll notify our managed firewall team to make the change on behalf of this customer. So we can go from detection, response, mitigation, all the way through remediation. So long-winded way of saying we have a slightly different approach, but it is always based on increasing visibility and then connecting other features into this for our managed detection and response offering. All of this is supported by our platform, and you heard Craig use the platform term quite a bit, and it's true, you do need a platform to connect all of this together. And so our platform is the Go Secure Titan platform. It does all of that back-end correlation and analysis that Craig was talking about, and it does provide you that single portal that allows you that single pane of glass into your services. It is our MDR service, it is our centralized ticketing, we have reporting. It's fairly new in the grand scheme of things, the current version, and so we are actively updating it to add additional solutions. So we have our traditional email gateways, for example, those will be in Titan in 2022. But it is that platform that we have built to do all of this, and then the single portal, the Go Secure Titan portal, to give you that visibility and allow you to see what we're seeing, but also to interact with us through ticketing and reporting and other capabilities. So we do have that backstop, as Craig mentioned, that any good MDR and even XDR provider needs of a strong platform to pull all this together. Always good to hear from your customers. Yeah, I've been involved in, again, the vendor side for probably close to 20 years now. I've been on multiple sides of the proverbial table, from an SE to an implementer, and I've actually done everything in between as well. So it's great to hear from your customers, and just wanted to show a couple of quick customer quotes here. As Craig mentioned, if you're talking to either an MDR or an XDR provider as a possibility for your organization, you want to hear from their customers. Here you go, a couple of them real quickly here. Absolutely, if you consider Go Secure for any of your cybersecurity needs, we have many more, but just wanted to pull together with what Craig was talking about having that customer reference, somebody who's willing to talk well about the service they are getting from us. And we also bundle our MDR into, hopefully easily digestible bundles. You can see how we connected them here. There is always the ability to go a la carte, if you will, but we believe that we have bundled them well enough together here to give most of the people, and in fact, based on our sales, it is true, what they need to achieve their current outcomes. And that was one of the first terms that Craig used, and I fully support the use of it. What is your desired outcome? And then you have to figure out how you get there. And if MDR is the right solution, and increasingly with our customer base, it is, then one of our MDR bundles will help get you to where you need to be. You can see some of the options are just additional levels of detection and response. As Craig mentioned, lots of letters you can put in front of the D and R, but we just have a lot of different ways we can mix and match this. But again, we can also do a la carte, so our MDR Complete is more of an a la carte. Let's pick and choose what you do truly need to achieve the outcome that you want. So our final poll here, as we've covered a lot, we're actually 49 minutes in. So Craig, I gave us 30 to 35 minutes, but we've actually exceeded that, which is good. I always love having these engaged conversations. I know, no, we're good. We booked for the full hour, so it's all fine there. But we do have one final poll, which is, which of the following is a challenge you face in your security program that MDR might be able to help address? Again, back to outcomes. Which of these do you think MDR might be able to help you achieve the outcome you need? So there you go. There's the poll itself. So please answer, and I will go on mute for just a moment, and we'll come back in about 30 seconds.
John, I need a protest. I think panelists need to be able to vote.
We will take your protest under consideration, Craig.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
All right, there we go. That's about our 30 to 45 seconds. So let's close the poll and interject a little Jeopardy music here while we get the final tally here. And I know there will not be any actual music for a lot of copyright laws, but we'll wait for our amazing marketing team to give us the results here in just a moment. And we do see we have one question that's come through already. One final reminder to please ask your questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. I will not sing the Jeopardy theme song either. And results are up. I'm being told I don't see them, but that's just fine as well. Craig, anything? Do you see the results? I'm gonna start with that.
Yeah, I can see the results. So numero uno, numbers, not enough resources to probably investigate every issue. That was far and away 5%. The rest were in the 40s, except for concern about negligent, malicious actions by insiders was at 37%. So that's interesting. Maybe we talked about that too much, so we're influencing this poll. You know, it's hard to have the resources to properly investigate every issue. You know, one of the things that we talk about with different firms or people that are in the industry is how well are they sleeping at night? You know,
right.
when you clock off and hit the shift and you go home, so many security people end up thinking, did I do everything right in that investigation? You know, or if you're handing it off to someone else, are they going to have the same expertise that I have in there? You know, that's just it's hard. You know, one of the cool things about not being a practitioner anymore for me, John, is I don't have to worry about anyone calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning because my environment's blowing up. But I imagine that's not necessarily true for people in your audience today. You know, they're worried about not only do they have enough resources, but maybe the question is, without insulting anyone, is are your resources trained? Are they equipped with the right tools and platforms to be able to properly investigate every issue?
Yeah, that, you know, we see that a lot when we're talking to organizations. They say, well, yeah, I've got my team. And then we dig into it a bit deeper. I mean, I will say here at GoSecure, we have our Titan Labs research team. And that's our only job in life, is to see what's going on in the world and make sure that, you know, our solutions are up to date on them and able to detect them. And we see a lot, for example, in our inbox solution that we hand off to the Titan Labs team, and they do the reverse engineering and all the normal research. You know, that goes back in. But my point is how many organizations can do that? You know, they say I have a team, but do you have a reverse engineer on hand? Do you have somebody who can write, you know, whatever rules necessary for a SIM to do that? Yeah, it's just to your point. There's a lot more than just saying I can do the research. Is can I really do the depth necessary and then make it actionable in my environment? And I think that's where a lot of organizations just get stuck. They can't do all that.
Yeah. The tied for second here was the lack of visibility across networks and endpoints and endless alerts from current security technologies. And I can see why those would come in fairly close to each other. You know, lack of visibility, I think, still kind of reflects the fact that, you know, if EDR represents the highest level of your security maturity right now, then you're probably worried. You know, because you're not getting the visibility that you, or you may even have the visibility, maybe you're able to pull some PCAPs or something to take a look at what's going on, but are you able to correlate what you're seeing across the environment? So that comes in second, as well as endless alerts. Yeah, there's a lot of alerts, you know, and how do you triage those, John? You know, what sort of system do you have that says, you know, this is the most important thing you need to look at, and who's correlating that alert versus what's at risk? Because if we didn't have anything at risk, then we wouldn't have to worry about all this stuff. But we got stuff that is a higher risk in terms of the value that it represents that we need to protect. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I will say, just even from our perspective, the volume of alerts is truly not declining. In fact, quite the opposite. It's just crazy what's going on out there with that. And, you know, I will say, for any organization that's correlating and analyzing alerts, alert fatigue is a real problem. And I think I read somewhere recently over the holidays, Thanksgiving, like 70% of cybersecurity professionals say that alert fatigue is causing them stress in their personal lives. Not surprised, but to your point, scary. I'm with you. I don't want to be a practitioner these days. I'm glad that's behind me, but it's a problem. It is absolutely a problem. And yeah, I just don't know how organizations, you know, they try and handle it, but it's hard. It's a tough world today.
Yeah, a dangerous one too.
Dangerous one, yeah, no shortage there. Okay, I heard there was another question that came in. Let's see if I can get to it this time. Didn't see any more. All right, hold on a second. One of my marketing people. So there's a question about, you know, how MDR pricing is determined. I will just speak from the Go Secure side of things. And if you see something appreciably different, Craig, please let me know. We do base it on endpoints. An endpoint can be a laptop, it can be a desktop, it can be a server, it can be a cloud instance. Any of those qualify because we do have to run an agent on any of those. That agent checks in, which allows us to not only see a lot of the alerts that Craig and I were just talking about, but also take some of the mitigative actions. We can quarantine an endpoint, kill a process, various things like that to mitigate it, and then work with you to figure out what the final remediation is and who's involved. So that's how we do it. I'm not sure if you see something different, Greg.
Yeah, that's a common. I mean, however you price it, the dollars always kind of come out the same, you know. So you know, it helps to be flexible, but sometimes it's consumed upon data. Sometimes people will say, well, how much data do we ingest? You might have differences in pricing based upon the services that wrap around it. So, for example, how much threat hunting does your provider do? That'll influence the price a lot. How much they may or may not get involved in terms of your daily operations. You know, MDR is not a SOC as a service. It's focused in on detection and response. But you know, if you have to go beyond that, then there's going to be additional costs.
All right. Interesting question here is somebody questioned that they have detected a few infections on the endpoint, or their EDR has. Oh no, the security professionals detected the infection themselves. It bypassed EDR. They were all communicating with pretty unknown C2 servers with no reputation, so basic outbound IP and no reputation or anything to deal with here. So, you know, I guess maybe what the question here is, the question behind the question is, no technology is perfect. We all know that. You know, you and I have seen enough of this, and I don't think anybody on the call is expecting that either. But, you know, how do you get a sense from a provider that, you know, they are, let's call it, staying ahead of the curve?
Yeah. You know, part of that is just more of a recognition that, again, like you said, no one's perfect. So what are they doing in terms of their threat hunting? You know, because threat hunting is that classic thing that takes a look at what sort of zero-day exploits survived the 0 day without being picked up. So how much threat hunting are they doing that? And part of it's also start taking a look at the threat intelligence. You know, ask your provider, you know, what sources are they getting their threat intelligence from? Are they able to proactively give you notifications that allow you to do things, I think I mentioned before, such as, you know, add something to your blacklist for IPs, or do a particular patching, or do a different configuration? I think that's kind of important. But ask them, you know, how many people do they have working in their threat intelligence arena? You know, are you able to get contextualized reports that tell you about the sort of threats that they're seeing in the arena? So ask lots of questions.
Yeah, no, and even for myself being on the vendor side, I urge that as well. Ask lots of questions. I mean, part of it is, what are your expected outcomes? That's an internal question to ask. But yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions of us. I will say that here at Go Secure, you know, we want to give you the right solution. And if we're not that right solution, let's have that conversation. We don't want to sell you something you don't need. because we do want to make sure you're getting the outcomes you need. So ask away. There's really no, the proverbial, there's no bad question. There's just a lot going on in this market. There's a lot of changes happening seemingly very quickly. And so it is, well worth your time and any vendor you consider their time to answer your questions and hopefully give you, very, very honest question or very, very honest answers. So we are at the top of the hour. We have covered our full 60 minutes here. Craig, any closing comments from yourself before we let our guests go?
Happy holidays.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. No,
actually, let me throw something in here real quick. And I think everyone just needs to be vigilant because, we get distracted around the holidays, right, John? And things occur, and it always seems like attacks tend to occur more around holidays than at other times. So while it's easy to let your guard down, I would just encourage your audience to stay vigilant. That if you're at DEFCON 8 at a normal basis, you probably want to be at DEFCON 9, during the holidays, because people get distracted, and that's when attacks are more likely to be launched. So I sound like a bah humbug guy when I say that, right?
But unfortunately, yeah, it is a reality of the world we all play in, and whatever side of the table we exist, it is the world that we live in. And yeah, I mean, it's not bah humbug; it's just a hard, cold reality. So let me agree with the happy holidays to everybody. Thank you all for giving us an hour of your time this morning. Hopefully, you found this interesting. We got a number of questions that popped in at the end, which is great. Always love to have conversations. For those questions that we did not ask or answer, somebody from Go Secure will reach out and see if you want to talk or just get an answer, gauge how best we can help you. But on behalf of Go Secure, thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of Go Secure, Craig, as always, wonderful to talk to you and with you. Look forward to doing more of these again in the future. But with that, I will end the presentation. And again, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful holiday.
Thanks everyone.